Welcome to Psycho Cinema Therapy Theater, where today we have a special double feature of Eugenie, the story of her descent into perversion, and Venus in Furs, as we honor Jess Franco, the cinematic prophet, the man whose movie threw rocks at the upper class who were trying to imprison the lower class in Franco, with fascism creeping around every corner and stories of excess and perversion at Epstein Island. Jess Franco seems like a prophet. An older woman who tried to seduce the husband of a rather stick-in-the-mud woman who kind of controlled her daughter with an iron thumb, to basically convince him to let her take her young daughter to an island where a bunch of Marquis de Sade aficionados would basically have their way with her, and by the end of it you realize that she's being set up to be a sacrifice. Well, I'm watching this movie and suddenly I'm thinking, gosh, this plot sounds very familiar. An older woman trying to lure young girls to an island where there's immoral things going on, and then it occurred to me, yes, current events. This is exactly what's happened in the Epstein case, and whether or not we get the files released or not, that's the basic gist of it. An older woman tried to bring in younger women to entertain the rich and powerful people in our society, and now it all seems to be coming back out, and whether or not the rich and powerful may still remain rich and powerful, well, that's a question for another time. But the mere fact that the plot of this wild and crazy movie from the 60s seemed to reflect current events made me want to give this movie another try. Even though this movie was done decades before the Epstein investigation, there's one little thing that I saw in this movie that I just cannot unsee, that truly relates to today's current events. I'll tell you at the end, so stick with this program. So this movie begins with Maria Rom, who is laying in her bed in a city that I can't tell if it looks super polluted from the end titles, but I really love these drawings here, so artificial. But we go into her room and we see that she is reading the Marquis de Sade, and she's really getting off listening, reading and imagining the ritual that she is trying to envision from this book. And suddenly she gets a call, and of course it's Eugenie, and she invites her to come out to the island, and Eugenie is still game to come out. Eugenie is a little upset because she feels that she has no control or no freedom. So the father goes and meets with the Madame Saint-Ang, as played by Maria Rom, and well, after a few get-downs of major sexual negotiation, he agrees, oh, okay, you want my youngest daughter, I'll let her come. And so the next thing you know, there she is, going on her way to this private island run by two rich people, very ultra-rich, a brother and a sister team. We don't really hear so much about what they do, but we know that they met Eugenie at a United Nations function. So we're talking about people who must, in this fictitious world, be very up in their government if they're meeting them at a meeting of an ambassador. You go a little further as she starts going into their library and find out that she's reading the Marquis de Sade, which of course they totally encourage. And then of course, you've got the two people who are helping them out who probably aren't getting paid what they're worth, which explains one reason, other than the fact that maybe they actually have moral outrage in this movie. But one of them is upset when they find out, he witnesses them putting drugs in the drink of Eugenie that causes her to knock out. And he's very upset at that. He confronts Madame Saint-Ang about it.
The wine was drugged.
What of it?
You brought her here as a plaything.
I would remind you, Augustine, that when I saw you first, you were grateful to have enough to eat. You had nothing but the ragged clothes you wore. No future and no hope.
business returns back to normal. Then, of course, on one of those nights, that's when the scary people, the scary rich people are arriving to the island. And these people, of course, like to dress as the Marquis de Sade dressed back centuries ago. So they have a classical look to it. And of course, there's Christopher Lee playing Domance. And an interesting story regarding Christopher Lee about this movie, and he talks about this. You can look it up on YouTube, but he claims he wasn't aware that he was in a sexual leaning movie filled with nudity and debauchery and all that. They just brought him in to read a few things, and then he went back home and then later found out that his movie was being shown in a kind of theater not known for showing Christopher Lee movies. Anyway, I don't buy that. When Eugenie awakes from some of these mistreatments from the brother and sister, and of course from those party goers who traveled great distances to show up in costume, they try to tell her that it was just a bad dream she had, that none of this really happened. And this works up until the second time it happens, and then she's convinced that this was not a dream. And this drives Eugenie into a fit of anger where she kills the brother. And then at that point, all the rich people in their nice ancient looking costumes show up, and suddenly they take their side. They are ready to also stab Madame Saint Ang, and so Eugenie also kills them. She kills the brother. She basically she gets revenge on both the brother and sisters and kills them both. However, then Christopher Lee comes up and congratulates her for that, but then says at any moment your mother's going to be coming with the police and she will be arrested, and people don't look kindly on murderers. And at that point, Eugenie is so upset that she takes a run through the island. She doesn't even have time to put on her clothes. She's just running through the island naked. And then suddenly she comes across a graveyard because ultimately whatever this group is, they seem to require the sacrifice of a young woman, perhaps a young virgin, a young woman that evening. And she sees a graveyard filled with past sacrifices. And she will not be one of those sacrifices, but she may be going to prison anyway. And so she's crying and kneeling. The next thing you know, we wake up and we're back where we're at the beginning of the movie. And we realize number of scenarios. This could have been just all in her imagination. Or she could have fallen asleep, and all of this could have been just a vast dream. But the thing is that this dream or this fantasy ended where she herself gets killed, her brother gets killed. And so what does she do at this notion that everybody's going to get killed in her fantasy? Wakes up, gets the phone call for Eugenie, and she invites her to come out to the island, and Eugenie is still game to come out, and she's still game to have her in spite of her dark fantasy. Is this something that she is going to try to work on, that she's going to try to make a reality, even if it does end with her death? These are a mighty sick group of people who ultimately don't even seem to care about their own demise. And I wonder if that was truly the case with this current crop of people, but it can't be because they're just holding on to the files so much. They don't want the truth to come out, unlike the people in the Jess Franco movie who probably were tired of carrying the truth and were just kind of hoping that somebody put an end to their misery. In any event, there are other movies though that Jess Franco made that concerned rich people going to islands for debauched purposes. Um, One of them was The House of Lost Women, and that was about a family who showed up because they thought that their father figure had done immoral things, only to realize at the end of the movie that he never really did anything. He just moved to just have that reputation of someone who was just leaving because of debauched circumstances. Then there's a sexual story of O. Now that one is a little bit more realistic. And this one, though, has a couple who have again seemed to have pledged that they would bring someone that they would totally debauch and then at the end kill. Again, this killing comes in the movie, and that they would offer up, I guess, as a sacrifice. So they bring her over and they have a bunch of sexual happenings, but then at the end, the guys who brought her there, they can't perform. They keep breaking down in tears, crying, I can't go through it. But they don't, say exactly what it is that they have to go through of until finally at the end of it, one of them just goes crazy and starts killing everybody on the island, which kind of wonder why that didn't happen on Epstein's Island. But I just think it's pretty interesting that you have these fictitious movies about corrupt rich people going to islands, and now we see this happening in real life. But the one thing that I noticed out of this entire debacle is one interesting fact that is just not explained, and I've looked this up on web pages and books, and I can't find anything. But look at this pillow. Take a look at that. Who does that picture remind you of? Jess Franco, the luckiest movie prophet who ever lived.
Anyway, he starts playing the trumpet and he sees a figure in the ocean being washed up the shore, and he turns the figure over, and it turns out to be none other than Wanda Reed, a woman that he had met while playing a swanky party either yesterday, last month, last year, as the narration says. But at this party, he saw Wanda Reed, and of course he felt rather inadequate because he was not rich like some of the people that were there. And he talks about the people that he met, a millionaire playboy, a photographer, an art dealer named Cap, and he finds that they're all following Wanda Reed. So he goes and he follows them down and finds out that the millionaire playboy, played by Klaus Kinski, tries to max her. Why? Because it's a sadistic crowd. And along comes the art dealer named Cap, who participates, the photographer who kind of slaps her around too. No real reason at all given. They're just bashing on Wanda Reed until eventually Klaus Kinski pulls out a dagger and stabs her dead. And of course, our super innocent narrator, named Jimmy, by the way, the character of Jimmy, as played by James Darren, sees them, and in spite of the fact that she's killed, he just says, hey, that's not my scene, and he takes off. Well, as far as I'm concerned, every single person involved in that scene's guilty, especially the one who saw it and didn't do anything about it, never raised a voice. He goes to Rio, where he's playing at a party, and suddenly who walks into the party but Wanda Reed? Hey, isn't she supposed to be dead? And he follows her, and things tend to get a little bit dreamlike, but they do get together, and they do talk about the past, and she talks about what a terrible night it was, but he still loved them. They were still her friends, even though they treated her like crap. And then at various points in the movie, we cut away to where Wanda Reed visits her various friends. She visits the art dealer, and it looks almost like all is forgiven until finally they look like they're about to have sex, but then at the very height of everything, he looks down and sees her corpse. The same thing happens to the photographer. They begin to go through the process of making love, and then at the height of everything, she looks down and sees her corpse. And of course, the same thing happens to Klaus Kinski, who is actually kind of near death's door anyway when she meets him. And he tells her this story about a sultan who gave one of his wives the power to rule for 24 hours. And of course, what she does is she kills him at the end of his rule, and he winds up dying too. So you look at all this and you're thinking, at first if you're looking at it, you're probably trying to look at this realistically. Well, is she dead or is she alive? Why is she coming back to visit these people? And the longer I've watched this, I've kind of come to the conclusion that she's dead, and in each of the situations we're seeing the people who may have rough exterior shells but are actually haunted by the guilt, and this is something that's happening in their imagination. Or perhaps they are already at death's door and death is delivering them a final dream, and the dream that death leaves is their infractions against this woman. Dream imagery plays a large part in Venus in Furs, especially in this scene where The culprits recognize their guilt and have to come to terms with it. And then suddenly, for no reason at all, we have this panicking Swami in the middle of it. And of course, at certain points, we do see a detective come to question Jimmy about Wanda Reed because they know that she's dead, but somehow she keeps being seen with these people. And Jimmy goes up, takes Wanda Reed, and they drive off to try to escape the detective. And then she jumps out of the car and runs into a graveyard. And when he runs into the graveyard, he sees a gravestone devoted to Wanda Reed. It's written to Wanda Reed, who washed up on our shores. May she find here the peace that she's never known in life. And then we are back at the beach, where we were at the very beginning of this movie. And he looks up and he sees a figure in the ocean. And he goes and he pulls the figure back, but it's not Wanda Reed, it is himself, because he has been dead the whole time. This entire movie has just been an illusion in his head as his mind prepared himself for the eventuality of death. And one thing that I've always wondered, and I tend to be a non-believer, a secular person, and so I'm not necessarily a big believer in the afterlife, but I sometimes wonder if at the very point when we leave, when Venus in Furs, a stand-in for death in this movie, makes her revelation known to us, if we're lucky, maybe we get this one great big final dream that maybe we meet everybody we've ever met in our lives, or maybe just a few choice persons in perfect atmosphere. Maybe that's nature's gifts to us, one big final dream before we sail off. And that's kind of what this movie reminds me of. This looks like Jimmy is having his one final dream, which unfortunately, it's his guilt. He's leaving this mortal coil filled with nothing but guilt, because as we've gone through the movie, we seem to be getting the impression that little Jimmy is this nice, innocent person, but he is perhaps the worst of all, because he saw the crime that's being inflicted on Wanda Reed, and he did nothing. Nobody can escape death. Nobody can escape their own personal judgment. And Venus in Furs certainly illustrates that truth.
Venus in Furs will be smiling when that moment arrives. Venus in Furs will be smiling, oh, when that moment arrives. For those who show no mercy then, no mercy will be shown. For those who got their pleasures from the strangled cries and groans, the grins that fill their evil faces will be wiped for sure. Sometime someone somewhere will come knocking, knocking on the door, and Venus in Furs will be smiling, oh, when that moment arrives. Venus in Furs will be smiling.
And thank you for watching Psycho Cinema Therapy Theater. And if you liked what you saw, then please, by all means, like this video, subscribe, and we'll see you next time as we review and discuss even more movies. Thank you for watching.